The blood-curdling scream that tore through Rebecca Cooper's cabin on that cold autumn morning of 1881 wasn't her own, though the horror that gripped her heart made her wish it had been. Standing in her doorway, silhouetted against the rising Arizona sun, was the man she'd crossed 3 states and changed her name to escape her ex-husband, Frank Sullivan. "Found you at last, Becky," he sneered, his familiar voice sending ice through her veins. "Thought you could just disappear, did you?" Rebecca backed away, her hands trembling as she reached for the kitchen counter behind her. 5 months she'd been in Kingman, Arizona. 5 months of peace, of slowly rebuilding the shattered pieces of her life. 5 months of believing she was finally free. "Get out, Frank," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You have no right to be here." Frank stepped into the small cabin, his boots leaving dusty prints on her clean floor. He looked thinner than she remembered, his once handsome face now gaunt and weathered, his eyes bloodshot. The smell of whiskey hung about him like a cloud. "No right," he laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "You're still my wife, Becky, till death do us part, remember." "The judge in Denver granted our divorce," Rebecca countered, her fingers finding the handle of a cast-iron pan. "I haven't been your wife for over a year now." Frank's face darkened. "That piece of paper doesn't mean a thing to me. You're coming back to Colorado." "I'll do no such thing." Rebecca lifted her chin defiantly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I've made a life here. This is my home now." "Home?" Frank scoffed, glancing around the modest cabin. "This shack, working as a seamstress in some backwater town, that's the life you left me for." "I left because you nearly beat me to death, Frank." The words came out stronger than she expected, fueled by years of pain and fear. "And I'm not going anywhere with you. Not now, not ever." Frank's hand moved to his belt where his revolver sat in its holster. "We'll see about that." Before he could draw, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Frank froze, his hand still on his weapon. "Miss Cooper, everything all right in there?" The deep, unfamiliar voice carried through the wooden door. Frank's eyes narrowed as he stared at Rebecca. "Not a word," he whispered. Rebecca hesitated only for a moment before calling out, "No, please help." The door burst open with such force that it nearly came off its hinges. Standing on her porch was Jace Xavier, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who owned the neighboring ranch. Though they'd exchanged pleasantries in town, Rebecca had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. Jace took in the scene with one swift glance. Rebecca, pressed against the counter, the stranger with his hand on his gun, and drew his own revolver with lightning speed. "Step away from the lady," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. Frank raised his hand slowly. "This is a private matter between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Rebecca corrected, her voice trembling. Jace's eyes never left Frank as he addressed Rebecca. "This true, Miss Cooper?" "This man bothering you, he's my ex-husband from Colorado. He wasn't invited here." Jace nodded once. "Then I suggest you leave, mister. The lady doesn't want your company." Frank's face contorted with rage. "This isn't your business, cowboy." "A lady in distress is always my business," Jace replied evenly. "Now you can walk out that door on your own 2 feet, or I can drag you out. Your choice." For a tense moment, Rebecca thought Frank might draw his gun anyway. Instead, he spat on her floor. "This isn't over, Becky," he growled. "Not by a long shot." As he stormed past Jace, the cowboy caught his arm. "One more thing," Jace said quietly. "If I see you near Miss Cooper again, they'll be shipping what's left of you back to Colorado in a pine box. We understand each other." Frank wrenched his arm free and stalked away. When he was gone, Rebecca's legs gave way. She sank to the floor, the pan still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Jace holstered his weapon and crouched beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you hurt, Miss Cooper?" Rebecca shook her head. No, thanks to you. She looked up at him, meeting those steady gray eyes. How did you know? Was riding by on my way to town. Heard raised voices. He glanced at the door. Sorry about that. I'll fix it for you later today. Don't apologize, Rebecca said. I'm grateful you were passing by. Jace helped her to her feet. He was even taller up close, towering over her 5'4" frame. Despite his imposing presence, there was a gentleness in the way he steadied her. You think he'll come back? He asked. Rebecca nodded grimly. I know Frank, he's not the type to give up easily. Jace's expression hardened. Then I'd best stay close by, at least until we can be sure he's gone for good. I couldn't ask that of you, Mr. Xavier. Jace, he corrected. And you're not asking, I'm offering. He glanced out the window toward the road into town. Truth is, I never did care for men who threaten women. Rebecca managed a small smile. Then I'm even more fortunate you were riding by. Seems that way, Jace agreed. His weathered face softened slightly. Now, how about I fix that door while you make us some coffee? Something tells me we've got some planning to do. As Rebecca put the kettle on, she wondered what twist of fate had brought Jace Xavier to her door that morning. Whatever it was, looking at his tall figure working on her broken door, she found herself profoundly grateful. She just hoped his presence would be enough to keep Frank away, and that her ex-husband wouldn't make good on his promise to return. The morning stretched into afternoon as Jace repaired Rebecca's door, adding a sturdier lock for good measure. He worked efficiently, his strong hands making quick work of the task. Rebecca insisted he stay for lunch, serving him a simple meal of cornbread and beans. How long have you been in Kingman? Jace asked as they ate at her small table. 5 months, Rebecca replied. I came west from Denver last spring. Jace nodded, studying her with those perceptive gray eyes. And your ex-husband, he's been looking for you all this time. Rebecca stared down at her plate. Frank doesn't like losing what he considers his property. The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. We were married for 4 years. It took me 3 of those to find the courage to leave. That must have been hard, Jace said quietly. Rebecca looked up, surprised by the understanding in his voice. Most men in her experience didn't concern themselves with a woman's troubles. It was, she admitted. Frank was. Charming when we first met. The son of a wealthy cattle baron. I thought I was fortunate when he chose me. She gave a humorless laugh. It didn't take long to discover my mistake. How did you get away? I planned for months, Rebecca said. Saved what little money I could hide from him. When he went on a 3-day drinking spree, I took my chance. Made it to Denver, where a sympathetic judge granted me a divorce despite Frank's father's influence. Then I just kept moving west. Jace nodded, his jaw tight. And now he's found you. Yes. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself. I should have known he would eventually. What will you do now? The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca had been asking herself the same thing since Frank appeared at her door. I don't know, she admitted. I can't keep running forever. I've built something here. I have regular customers, a roof over my head. And friends, Jace added. Mrs. Holloway at the general store speaks highly of you. So does the Reverend's wife. Rebecca smiled faintly. I've tried to be a good neighbor. From what I hear, you've succeeded. Jace pushed his empty plate aside, which is why I don't think you should have to run again. What choice do I have? Frank won't give up. Maybe he will with the right persuasion. Jace's expression grew serious. The stage to California leaves tomorrow. Perhaps your ex-husband should be on it. Rebecca's eyes widened. What are you suggesting? Nothing illegal if that's what you're worried about, Jace assured her. But sometimes a man needs a stronger message than words can provide. Before Rebecca could respond, a knock sounded at her newly repaired door. She tensed, but Jace was already on his feet, his hand near his holster. "Who is it?" Rebecca called. "Sheriff Morgan, Miss Cooper, just checking in." Jace relaxed slightly as Rebecca opened the door to reveal the town's aging lawman, his silver badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Afternoon, Sheriff," she greeted him. "Is something the matter?" Sheriff Morgan removed his hat, nodding to Jace. "Xavier, didn't expect to find you here." "Just helping Miss Cooper with some repairs," Jace replied evenly. The sheriff turned his attention back to Rebecca. "Got word there might be some trouble. Barkeep at the Silver Dollar said a stranger was asking questions about you this morning. Described you right down to that red hair of yours." Rebecca paled. "That would be my ex-husband, Frank Sullivan. He found me here this morning." Sheriff Morgan's bushy eyebrows rose. "Is that right? And what did he want? To take me back to Colorado, against my will?" The sheriff's weathered face darkened. "That's so. Well, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior in Kingman." He glanced at Jace. "Is that why you're here, Xavier? Run into this Sullivan fellow?" Jace nodded. "Found him threatening Miss Cooper, suggested he move on." "I appreciate that," Sheriff Morgan said, "but next time fetch me first. That's what I'm here for." He turned back to Rebecca. "Where's this ex-husband of yours now?" "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "He left a few hours ago." "He's likely staying at the hotel," Jace suggested, "or drinking away his frustrations at the saloon." Sheriff Morgan nodded. "I'll have a word with him. Make it clear he's not welcome to cause trouble here." He settled his hat back on his head. "In the meantime, Miss Cooper, you might want to stay with a friend tonight, just to be safe." "She can stay at my ranch," Jace offered. "I have a spare room and my housekeeper, Mrs. Tanner, would be happy for the company." Rebecca started to protest, but the sheriff nodded approvingly. "That's a fine idea. Xavier's place is the most defensible in the county and well outside town." He tipped his hat to Rebecca. "I'll let you know when Sullivan's moved on." After the sheriff departed, Rebecca turned to Jace. "I can't impose on you like that." "It's no imposition," Jace insisted. "And the sheriff's right, my ranch is more secure than this cabin. Frank won't find you there easily." Rebecca hesitated. She barely knew this man, yet he'd already risked himself to protect her once today. There was something in his steady gaze that inspired trust, a rare commodity in her experience. "All right," she finally agreed. "Just until Frank leaves town." Jace nodded. "Pack what you need. I'll bring my wagon around to take you there before dusk." As Jace left to fetch his wagon, Rebecca quickly gathered her essentials: clothes, her sewing kit, and the small wooden box containing her meager savings. As she worked, she couldn't help but wonder at the turn her life had taken in just one day. She'd come to Kingman seeking anonymity and peace. Now she was fleeing her home, dependent once again on a man's protection. Yet something told her Jace Xavier was nothing like Frank Sullivan. The cowboy had shown her more kindness in one day than her ex-husband had in 4 years of marriage. Rebecca only hoped she wasn't making another terrible mistake in trusting him. The Xavier Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Arizona territory, a verdant oasis in the otherwise rugged landscape. As Jace's wagon approached, Rebecca couldn't help but stare at the impressive 2-story ranch house, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. "You live here alone?" she asked, surprised by the size of the operation. Jace smiled faintly. "Just me, Mrs. Tanner, who keeps house, and 4 ranch hands who help with the cattle and horses." He guided the wagon to a stop before the main house. "My parents built this place 20 years ago. It's been mine since they passed 5 years back." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rebecca said softly. "Thank you." Jace jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her down. "They'd have liked you." The simple statement caught Rebecca off guard, warming her cheeks. Before she could respond, the front door opened, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are, Mr. Xavier. I was beginning to worry about." The woman stopped short when she spotted Rebecca. "Oh, I didn't realize we had company." "Mrs. Tanner, this is Miss Rebecca Cooper from town," Jace introduced them. "She'll be staying with us for a few days. Miss Cooper, this is Mrs. Tanner, the finest housekeeper and cook in all of Arizona Territory." Mrs. Tanner beamed at the praise before turning curious eyes to Rebecca. "Staying with us, you say?" "Miss Cooper has found herself in an unfortunate situation," Jace explained carefully. "Her ex-husband has arrived in town with unwelcome intentions. Sheriff Morgan thought it best she stay somewhere secure until the matter is resolved." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Tanner's kind eyes. "Say no more, Mr. Xavier." She stepped forward to take Rebecca's arm. "You poor dear. Come inside and get settled. I've just put a stew on for supper, and there's fresh bread cooling." Rebecca allowed herself to be led inside, grateful for the woman's easy acceptance. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly elegant, with polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. It spoke of taste and prosperity without ostentation. "The blue room upstairs should do nicely," Mrs. Tanner declared, guiding Rebecca toward the staircase. "It has a lovely view of the mountains and its own washstand." "You're very kind," Rebecca said. "I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense," Mrs. Tanner scoffed. "It's a pleasure to have another woman about the place. Mr. Xavier is a fine employer, but he's not much for conversation most days." Rebecca glanced back at Jace, who stood in the entryway with her bag, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Mrs. Tanner has been trying to civilize me for years," he remarked dryly. "With limited success." The housekeeper harumphed. "Don't you listen to him, Miss Cooper. He may act the rugged cowboy, but Mr. Xavier is as educated as any man in the territory. Has more books than the schoolhouse in town." Rebecca couldn't help but smile at their easy banter. There was clearly deep affection between employer and housekeeper, the kind that spoke of years of mutual respect. "I'll bring your bag up," Jace offered, following them up the stairs. The blue room, as Mrs. Tanner had called it, was charming, airy, and bright, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. True to Mrs. Tanner's description, the view of the distant mountains was spectacular. "This is lovely," Rebecca breathed, turning to face her hosts. "Thank you both for your kindness." "Happy to help," Jace said, setting her bag on a chair. "I need to check on something in the barn, but I'll be back for supper. Mrs. Tanner will see you have everything you need." After he departed, Mrs. Tanner helped Rebecca unpack her few belongings. The older woman chattered companionably, telling Rebecca about the ranch and its operations while diplomatically avoiding questions about Rebecca's past or her ex-husband. "Mr. Xavier doesn't bring many visitors here," Mrs. Tanner remarked as she showed Rebecca where fresh towels were kept. "He's a private man, keeps mostly to himself since his return." "His return?" Rebecca couldn't help asking. "From the war," Mrs. Tanner clarified. "He rode with the Union cavalry, came back changed, as they all did, I suppose." She sighed. "His parents were still alive then, but after they passed, he grew even more solitary. It does my heart good to see him taking an interest in someone's welfare again." Rebecca wasn't quite sure how to respond to that, so she simply smiled and thanked Mrs. Tanner again for her hospitality. Left alone to freshen up before dinner, Rebecca moved to the window, gazing out at the sprawling ranch. In the distance, she could see Jace's tall figure striding toward the barn, his long legs eating up the ground with easy confidence. What kind of man was he, this cowboy who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation? Who lived in this beautiful home with its books and comfortable furnishings, yet seemed more at ease outdoors among his cattle and horses. More importantly, what would he do when Frank inevitably came looking for her? The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of the blue room. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, she tensed. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back. Frank's unwelcome appearance, Jace's timely intervention, her temporary refuge at his ranch, the aroma of coffee and bacon wafted up from downstairs, prompting Rebecca to rise and dress quickly. She'd slept better than expected, exhausted by the day's emotions and lulled by the profound quiet of the ranch, so different from the more populous sounds of town. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Tanner bustling about the kitchen, humming as she worked. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" "Wonderfully, thank you," Rebecca replied. "Can I help with anything?" "You can pour yourself some coffee and have a seat," Mrs. Tanner instructed, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "Mr. Xavier's been up since dawn, but he should be in shortly for breakfast." As if summoned by her words, the back door opened, and Jace entered, bringing with him the fresh scent of morning air. He'd clearly been working already, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms dusted with dark hair. "Morning," he nodded to both women, removing his hat. "Hope you slept well, Miss Cooper. Please call me Rebecca," she responded. "And yes, I did. Your home is very peaceful." A hint of a smile touched Jace's lips. "Rebecca, then." He moved to the wash basin to clean up. "I spoke with one of my hands who was in town last night. Your ex-husband was making a nuisance of himself at the saloon, asking questions about you." Rebecca's momentary contentment evaporated. "Did he learn where I am?" "I don't think so," Jace replied, drying his hands. "But he knows someone helped you. He was offering money for information." Mrs. Tanner made a disapproving noise as she set plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. The nerve of that man! As if decent folks would help him harass a lady. "Unfortunately, not everyone in Kingman is decent folks," Jace pointed out, taking a seat at the table. "Which is why I'm heading into town after breakfast to speak with Sheriff Morgan." Rebecca looked up sharply. "I should go with you." "This is my problem, not yours." Jace shook his head. "You're safer here for now. My hands know to keep an eye out for strangers, and Mrs. Tanner is handier with a shotgun than you might expect." The housekeeper nodded emphatically. "Indeed I am. My late husband taught me well." Rebecca wanted to protest further, but the determined set of Jace's jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she focused on her breakfast, trying to ignore the worry gnawing at her. "What will you say to the sheriff?" she asked after a moment. "That we need a more permanent solution to your problem," Jace replied. "Sullivan needs to understand that you're not going back to Colorado with him willingly or otherwise." Rebecca set down her fork. "I've tried reasoning with Frank before. It doesn't work." "Then we won't reason with him," Jace said simply. "Some men only understand consequences." The quiet resolve in his voice sent a shiver down Rebecca's spine. Not of fear, she realized with surprise, but of something like hope. For the first time since Frank had appeared at her door, she felt that perhaps there might be a way out of this nightmare. "What can I do while you're gone?" she asked. Jace considered her question. "Stay inside the house. Help Mrs. Tanner if you like. I've told the men to alert you if anyone approaches." He hesitated, then added, "There's a rifle in my study if you need it. Second drawer of the desk." Rebecca nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "I know how to shoot. My father taught me before he died." A look of approval crossed Jace's face. "Good. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours." After breakfast, Rebecca helped Mrs. Tanner clean up, then insisted on assisting with the household chores. The activity helped distract her from her worries, and she found Mrs. Tanner's company soothing. The older woman had a gift for conversation that required little response, filling the silence with stories about the ranch and its history. Mr. Xavier's father built this place from nothing, Mrs. Tanner explained as they worked together folding fresh laundry. Came west after the Mexican War with nothing but determination and a good head for business. Started with just 20 acres and a few cattle. By the time he died, the Xavier Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the territory. And Jace took it over, Rebecca prompted. After he came back from the war, yes, though he was away again for a time. Mrs. Tanner's voice grew quieter. There was a young lady, Catherine was her name. They were to be married, but she took ill with fever and passed before the wedding. Rebecca's hand stilled on the sheet she was folding. How terrible for him. Mrs. Tanner nodded sadly. It was a dark time. Mr. Xavier rode off after the funeral, didn't come back for nearly a year. When he returned, he threw himself into expanding the ranch. Hardly ever goes to social gatherings anymore, though half the unmarried ladies in the county would be delighted for his attention. Rebecca absorbed this information silently, her heart aching for the loss Jace had suffered. It explained something of the quietness she sensed in him, the careful distance he maintained even while offering his protection. "He's a good man," Mrs. Tanner continued, apparently feeling she needed to emphasize this point. "The best employer I've ever had. Treats his workers fair, pays well, never raises his voice." She gave Rebecca a significant look, not like some men. Rebecca recognized the gentle probing for what it was. "My ex-husband was not a kind man," she acknowledged softly. "Our marriage was difficult." Mrs. Tanner's expression softened with understanding. "Say no more, dear. I've seen enough in my 60 years to recognize the signs." She patted Rebecca's hand. "You're safe here. Mr. Xavier won't let any harm come to you." "Why?" Rebecca couldn't help asking. "He barely knows me." "Why would he risk himself this way?" Mrs. Tanner considered the question thoughtfully. "I expect it's his nature. Can't abide injustice, that one. Plus, I suspect he sees something in you worth protecting." Her eyes twinkled. "And if I'm not mistaken, he finds you rather pleasing to look at, though he'd never say as much." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Tanner," the housekeeper laughed. "Don't mind an old woman's observations, dear. I've known Jace Xavier since he was a boy. I notice things." Before Rebecca could formulate a response, a commotion outside drew their attention. Both women moved to the window to see one of the ranch hands galloping toward the house, dust billowing behind his horse. "Something's wrong," Mrs. Tanner murmured, her earlier mirth vanishing. "That's Miguel, and he was supposed to be watching the north boundary today." Rebecca's heart began to race as the young ranch hand reined in his horse and dismounted in a fluid motion. She followed Mrs. Tanner to the front door, arriving just as Miguel reached the porch, his expression urgent. "Mrs. Tanner," he panted, removing his hat. "Rider coming. Strange man. Asked about the boss and if there was a woman staying here." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Frank," she whispered. Mrs. Tanner's pleasant face hardened with resolve. "Did you tell him anything, Miguel?" "No, madam. Said the boss was home but not receiving visitors." Miguel glanced at Rebecca. "He didn't believe me, said he'd just take a look for himself. I rode ahead to warn you." "Good boy," Mrs. Tanner approved. "Where was he when you left him?" "Coming up the north road. 5 minutes behind me, maybe less." Mrs. Tanner turned to Rebecca. "Go upstairs, dear. Lock yourself in Mr. Xavier's study. You remember what he said about the rifle?" Rebecca nodded, her mouth dry with fear. "What about you?" "I'll handle our unwelcome visitor," Mrs. Tanner said grimly. "Miguel, fetch Thomas and Will from the corral. I want them nearby, just in case." Miguel nodded and sprinted toward the corral while Mrs. Tanner herded Rebecca back inside. "Go on now," the older woman urged. And remember, Mr. Xavier wouldn't want you to hesitate if your safety is threatened." Rebecca hurried upstairs to Jace's study, a handsome room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk. She found the rifle exactly where he'd said it would be, loaded and ready. Taking it, she positioned herself by the window, which offered a clear view of the approach to the house. She didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, a rider appeared on the dusty road, Frank, looking even more disheveled than the day before. He rode with the loose posture of a man who'd been drinking, though it was not yet noon. Rebecca watched as he dismounted before the house, tethering his horse to the hitching post. Mrs. Tanner emerged onto the porch, arms crossed over her ample bosom, 3 ranch hands positioned strategically nearby. Though she couldn't hear the exchange clearly, Rebecca could see Frank gesturing angrily, pointing at the house. Mrs. Tanner remained immovable, shaking her head repeatedly. When Frank took a threatening step forward, all 3 ranch hands moved closer, hands hovering near their weapons. For a tense moment, Rebecca thought Frank might try to force his way past them. Instead, after a final angry gesture, he stormed back to his horse, mounted clumsily, and galloped away. Rebecca released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands trembling around the rifle. She'd been prepared to use it if necessary, but the thought of actually shooting a man, even Frank, made her stomach churn. She waited until Mrs. Tanner came upstairs to tell her it was safe before emerging from the study. "He's gone for now," the housekeeper assured her. "Ranted about rights to his wife and threatened all manner of things, but he left when the boys made it clear he wasn't welcome. He'll be back," Rebecca said with certainty, "and he'll be angrier than before." Mrs. Tanner nodded grimly. "I've sent Miguel to town to find Mr. Xavier. Until then, we'll keep watch." The rest of the morning passed in tense vigilance. Rebecca helped Mrs. Tanner prepare lunch, though neither had much appetite. They jumped at every sound, expecting Frank's return at any moment. It was mid-afternoon when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Rebecca tensed, but Mrs. Tanner, who'd been watching from the window, relaxed visibly. "It's Mr. Xavier," she announced with relief, "and he's brought the sheriff with him." Rebecca hurried to the door, her relief at seeing Jace overwhelming. He dismounted quickly, his expression tight with concern as he strode toward the house. "Miguel told me what happened," he said without preamble. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Rebecca assured him. "Your Mrs. Tanner and the ranch hands sent him away before he could cause any trouble." Jace's eyes softened momentarily. "Good." He turned to Sheriff Morgan, who was dismounting more slowly, his aging bones clearly protesting the ride. "Sheriff, this is exactly what I was telling you about. Sullivan is becoming more aggressive." Sheriff Morgan nodded, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "I believe you now, Xavier. Tried to reason with Sullivan last night, told him to leave Miss Cooper be. He wasn't in a listening mood." He turned to Rebecca. "I'm sorry, Miss Cooper. I'd hoped to handle this peaceably." "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "Now we take more decisive action," Sheriff Morgan replied. "I've sent a telegram to the authorities in Denver, confirming your divorce is legal and binding. Should hear back within a day or two." "And in the meantime," Jace pressed. "In the meantime, I'm officially warning Sullivan to stay away from both Miss Cooper and your property," the sheriff said. "If he violates that warning, I have cause to arrest him for trespassing and harassment." Rebecca wasn't convinced this would be enough to deter Frank, and from Jace's expression, neither was he. "With all due respect, Sheriff," Jace said carefully, "Sullivan doesn't strike me as a man who respects the law." Sheriff Morgan sighed. "I know. Which is why I'm suggesting Miss Cooper remain here under your protection until we can resolve this matter permanently." He looked at Rebecca. "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town, under my direct supervision." The thought of being closer to Frank, even with the sheriff's protection, made Rebecca shudder. "I'd rather stay here if Mr. Xavier doesn't mind." "I don't mind," Jace said immediately. "My offer of sanctuary stands for as long as you need it." Sheriff Morgan nodded. "Good. I'll ride back to town and have another talk with Sullivan. Make it clear that he's being watched." He settled his hat back on his head. "Xavier, I'd avoid coming to town yourself for a day or two. Sullivan's been asking questions about you, and he's not happy about your interference." After the sheriff departed, Jace and Rebecca retreated to the porch, where Mrs. Tanner brought them fresh lemonade before tactfully withdrawing. "Did your visit to town yield any other information?" Rebecca asked. Jace nodded, his expression grim. "Sullivan's been making himself known to everyone who'll listen. Claims you stole money from him before you left, that the divorce isn't legal." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her glass. "That's not true. I took nothing but what was rightfully mine, my mother's jewelry and the small savings I'd hidden from him." "I know," Jace assured her. "Anyone who spent 5 minutes in your company would know you're no thief." He sipped his lemonade thoughtfully. "The problem is, Sullivan's desperate. And desperate men are dangerous." "What should we do?" Jace met her eyes directly. "The stage to California leaves tomorrow afternoon. I think you should be on it." Rebecca stared at him, her heart sinking. "You want me to run again?" "No," Jace corrected her. "I want Sullivan to believe you've run again. In reality, you'll circle back here after dark. He'll follow the stage thinking you're on it." Understanding dawned. "A decoy?" Jace nodded. "I've already spoken to the stagecoach driver. He's willing to help, especially after I explained the situation and made it worth his while. And when Frank discovers I'm not on the stage, he'll be 2 days' ride from Kingman, with no easy way to return quickly." Jace's expression hardened. "By then, Sheriff Morgan should have confirmation of your divorce from Denver, and Sullivan will find himself facing arrest if he shows his face here again." It was a good plan, Rebecca had to admit, yet something about it felt incomplete. "What if he does come back anyway?" she asked. "Frank isn't easily deterred." Jace was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Then I'll make sure he leaves on the next train east," he said finally. "One way or another." The quiet certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Rebecca's spine, not of fear, but of something more complex. No one had ever stood so firmly between her and harm before. Not her father, who died when she was 16. Certainly not Frank, who had been the source of her greatest pain. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked softly. "The truth, please." Jace set down his glass and turned to face her fully. In the late afternoon light, his features seemed both harder and more vulnerable. "Because when I saw you standing in your cabin, facing down a man twice your size without backing down, I recognized something." He paused. "Courage. The same kind my mother had when she followed my father west with nothing but faith that they'd make a life here." He looked out over his land, the ranch his parents had built from nothing. "My father taught me that a man protects those who need protecting. Not because they're weak, but because it's the right thing to do." His eyes returned to hers. "You're not weak, Rebecca Cooper, but right now you need help, and I'm in a position to give it." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." A hint of a smile touched Jace's lips. "You can start by trusting me to see this through." "Can you do that?" Rebecca nodded, realizing with some surprise that she did trust this quiet, determined cowboy. More than she'd trusted anyone in a very long time. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." The next day unfolded according to Jace's carefully laid plan. Rebecca was escorted into town before noon, openly visible as she boarded the westbound stage to California. Frank Sullivan watched from the shadows of the saloon across the street. exactly as Jace had predicted he would. What Frank didn't see was Rebecca slipping out the opposite door of the stagecoach while the driver created a distraction loading the mail. She hurried through the back alleys of Kingman to where Miguel waited with a horse, hidden from view. By the time the stage pulled away, Rebecca was already riding in the opposite direction, taking a circuitous route back to the Xavier ranch. As she rode, she saw the unmistakable figure of Frank galloping after the departing stagecoach, convinced his prey was escaping. She returned to the ranch by dusk, where Jace waited anxiously on the porch. The relief in his eyes when he spotted her approaching was palpable. "It worked," she told him as he helped her dismount. "Frank followed the stage just as you said he would." Jace's shoulders relaxed. "Good, Sheriff Morgan will send word when he receives the telegram from Denver. Until then, you're safe here." The next 2 days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. Rebecca found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She helped Mrs. Tanner with household tasks, read from Jace's extensive library, and even assisted with mending some of the ranch hands' clothing, putting her seamstress skills to good use. In the evenings, she and Jace would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple. They really talked in a way Rebecca hadn't experienced with a man before. Jace told her about his parents, his time in the war, his dreams for the ranch. Rebecca shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, her journey west, the life she hoped to build for herself. On the third morning, Sheriff Morgan rode out to the ranch with news. "Telegram came from Denver," he announced, accepting the coffee Mrs. Tanner offered. "Confirms everything you told me, Miss Cooper. Your divorce is legal and binding. Sullivan has no claim on you whatsoever." Relief washed through Rebecca. "Thank you, Sheriff." "There's more," Sheriff Morgan continued. "Seems Sullivan left behind some debts in Colorado. His father's ranch is failing gambling debts from the sound of it. That's likely why he was so desperate to find you." "He thought I took money that could save the ranch," Rebecca realized. "But there never was any money. Frank gambled away everything long before I left." Sheriff Morgan nodded. "Well, he won't be bothering you anymore. Stage returned this morning. Driver says Sullivan got off in Flagstaff, still thinking you were aboard. By the time he realizes you doubled back to Kingman, he'll have a hard time returning. I've alerted the marshals in Flagstaff about him. If he causes trouble there, he'll find himself behind bars." Jace, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. "And if he does manage to return, then he'll be arrested for harassment and threatening a citizen of my town," Sheriff Morgan said firmly. "I won't have men like that in Kingman." After the sheriff departed, Rebecca stood in Jace's study, gazing out the window at the sprawling ranch. She should have felt nothing but relief. Frank had been thwarted. Her divorce was confirmed as legal. She was safe. Yet a hollow feeling was growing in her chest. With the danger past, she had no reason to remain at the Xavier ranch, no excuse to continue these evening conversations with Jace, or to enjoy Mrs. Tanner's motherly attention. "You're welcome to stay longer, you know." She turned to find Jace standing in the doorway, watching her with those perceptive gray eyes. "I couldn't impose further," she said automatically. "You and Mrs. Tanner have already done so much. It's not an imposition." Jace stepped into the room, his tall frame seeming to fill the space. "I've enjoyed having you here." The simple admission warmed something inside her. "I've enjoyed being here," she confessed, "more than I expected to." Jace moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. "Then stay, at least until you're certain Sullivan won't return." Rebecca studied his face, seeking the real meaning behind his words. "And if I'm certain already, if I believe the sheriff that Frank is gone for good, Then stay because you want to, Jace said quietly. Because I want you to. Her heart beat faster at the undisguised emotion in his voice. Jace, whatever she might have said was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from downstairs, followed by Mrs. Tanner's startled cry. Jace was moving instantly, pushing past Rebecca toward the stairs, his hand already drawing the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he ordered, but Rebecca was already following, her own fear overridden by concern for Mrs. Tanner. They reached the bottom of the stairs to find Frank Sullivan standing in the kitchen doorway, a broken window behind him. He held Mrs. Tanner by the arm, a knife pressed to her throat. "Hello, Becky," he slurred, his bloodshot eyes fixing on Rebecca. "Thought you could trick me, did you? Getting on that stage, then sneaking back here to your cowboy." "Let her go, Frank," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She has nothing to do with this." Frank's laugh was harsh. "Oh, I'll let her go, as soon as you agree to come with me." His eyes slid to Jace, who stood with his gun trained on Frank's head. "Tell your protector to put that away, or the old woman gets it. You harm her, you're dead before you hit the floor," Jace said, his voice deadly quiet. Mrs. Tanner, despite the knife at her throat, remained remarkably composed. "Don't you worry about me, Mr. Xavier. This coward doesn't frighten me." Frank's grip on her tightened. "Shut up, old woman." "Frank, please," Rebecca tried again. "It's over. The sheriff has confirmation from Denver our divorce is legal. You have no claim on me." "I don't care what some piece of paper says," Frank shouted. "You're my wife, mine." "No, Frank," Rebecca said firmly. "I'm not. I haven't been for over a year, and I never will be again." Something in her tone must have penetrated Frank's alcohol-fogged brain. His face contorted with rage. "You think you're too good for me now, living in this fancy house with your cowboy." "I think I deserve better than a man who uses his fists instead of words," Rebecca replied, taking a careful step forward. "A man who gambled away everything we had, then blamed me for it." Frank's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You always did talk too much, Becky. Maybe I need to remind you what happens when you don't know your place." He shoved Mrs. Tanner aside roughly, lunging toward Rebecca with the knife. She stumbled backward, but before Frank could reach her, a gunshot cracked through the air. Frank jerked, the knife falling from suddenly nerveless fingers as he clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Jace stood with his smoking gun still aimed, his expression coldly furious. "Next one goes through your heart," he promised. "On your knees, Sullivan. Now." Frank, dazed with pain and shock, sank to his knees. Rebecca hurried to Mrs. Tanner, helping the shaken housekeeper to a chair. "Are you hurt?" she asked urgently. Mrs. Tanner shook her head. "Just startled, dear. Don't worry about me." Jace had moved forward to kick Frank's knife away, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. "Miguel," he called, and the young ranch hand appeared instantly from the front of the house, drawn by the gunshot. "Ride for the sheriff. Tell him Sullivan's returned and attacked Mrs. Tanner." As Miguel rode out, Rebecca found herself strangely calm. The confrontation she'd feared for months had finally happened. Frank had shown his true colors, not just to her but to witnesses. Whatever happened now, he could never force her to return to him. "You shot me," Frank said incredulously, staring up at Jace. "You actually shot me." "Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder," Jace replied evenly. "After what you did to Rebecca, you deserve much worse." Frank's bloodshot eyes shifted to Rebecca. "What lies have you been telling, Becky?" "Making me out to be some kind of monster." "I told the truth, Frank." Rebecca moved to stand beside Jace, drawing strength from his steady presence. "About the beatings, the gambling, everything." Something ugly twisted in Frank's expression. "You always were ungrateful. After everything I gave you, you gave her nothing but pain." Jace cut in, his voice hard. And now you've reached the end of your rope. It took nearly an hour for Sheriff Morgan to arrive, during which Mrs. Tanner bandaged Frank's wound, so he doesn't bleed on the floor, she explained tartly while Jace kept him covered. Frank alternated between cursing them all and pleading with Rebecca to help him, claiming he could change, that he still loved her. Rebecca remained unmoved. She'd heard these promises before, in the early days when she'd still believed them. Now they rang hollow, the desperate lies of a man who saw his control slipping away. Sheriff Morgan wasted no time. After hearing accounts from all present, he slapped handcuffs on Frank and hauled him to his feet. "Frank Sullivan, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, and threatening citizens of Kingman," he recited. "You'll be held until the circuit judge arrives next week to determine your sentence." "You can't do this to me," Frank protested. "She's my wife." "I have rights." "Ex-wife," Sheriff Morgan corrected. "And the only right you have now is to remain silent, which I suggest you exercise before you make things worse for yourself." As the sheriff led Frank away, Rebecca felt a curious lightness, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally been lifted. She watched through the window as Frank was loaded onto a wagon, his hands cuffed behind him, no longer the terrifying figure of her nightmares but a diminished, pathetic man. "He can't hurt you now," Jace said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Rebecca turned to him, seeing the concern in his eyes. "No, he can't," she agreed. "Thanks to you." Later that evening, after Mrs. Tanner had retired early, still shaken by her ordeal, Rebecca and Jace sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "What will happen to Frank?" Rebecca asked after a long, comfortable silence. "The judge is fair but strict," Jace replied. "Breaking into a home and threatening people with a knife will likely earn him at least a year in territorial prison. By the time he's released, I expect you'll be well established here if that's still your plan." Rebecca considered this. Her small cabin in town seemed impossibly distant now, as if it belonged to another life. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "These past days at the ranch have made me question what I really want." Jace's hand found hers on the swing between them, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "And what is it you want, Rebecca Cooper?" She turned to face him, reading the emotion in his eyes. "Peace, security. A place where I can build something lasting." She took a breath. "And someone to share it with, someone kind and honorable, someone who sees me for who I am, not who they want me to be." Jace's fingers tightened around hers. "I see you," he said softly. "I've seen you from the first moment, your courage, your strength, your kindness despite everything you've endured." He shifted closer, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "I know it's soon. You've barely had time to breathe free of Sullivan. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want you to know that there's a place for you here. Not as a guest or someone under my protection, but as—" "As what?" Rebecca prompted when he hesitated. Jace's eyes, usually so assured, held a hint of vulnerability. "As my partner, my equal. My wife, if you'll have me." The word wife had once filled Rebecca with dread. Now, spoken in Jace's deep, gentle voice, it sounded like a promise rather than a threat. "I need time," she said honestly. "Not because I doubt you, but because I want to be sure of myself. To know that I'm choosing you for the right reasons, not out of gratitude or fear." Jace nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I wouldn't want it any other way." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Take all the time you need, I'm not going anywhere." As summer turned to autumn, Rebecca found her place in Kingman. She returned to her cabin in town, resuming her work as a seamstress, but spent most weekends at the Xavier ranch. Her relationship with Jace grew slowly, naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Frank Sullivan was sentenced to 18 months in the territorial prison, with the stipulation that upon release, he was to leave Arizona Territory and never return. The threat that had shadowed Rebecca for so long was finally, truly gone. On a crisp October day, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwoods along the creek, Jace took Rebecca riding to his favorite spot on the ranch, a high plateau overlooking the valley, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. "I've been thinking," he said as they dismounted to enjoy the view. "About the future." Rebecca smiled, recognizing the slight nervousness in his tone. In the months they'd been courting, she'd come to read his moods with increasing accuracy. "What about the future?" she prompted. Jace took her hands in his. "I know I promised to give you time, and I meant it, but I find myself hoping that you might be ready now to hear what's in my heart." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "I'm listening." "I love you, Rebecca Cooper," Jace said simply. "Not because you needed my help or because I wanted to protect you. I love you for your determined spirit, your gentle heart, your strength in the face of adversity." He squeezed her hands. "I love the way you've made a place for yourself in this town, in this community. The way you've refused to let your past define your future." Rebecca felt tears welling in her eyes as Jace continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. "I love how you correct me when I'm wrong and support me when I'm right. How you've brought laughter back to my home and joy back to my life." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band. "And I would be honored beyond words if you would agree to build a life with me, not as my possession, but as my partner in all things." Rebecca looked at the ring, then up at Jace's hopeful face. The man before her was everything Frank Sullivan was not: patient, kind, respectful, honest. A man who had proven his worth not through words but through actions. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could stand alone if she chose to. Her decision to accept Jace would be made from strength, not weakness or fear. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I love you, Jace Xavier, and I would be proud to be your wife." The smile that broke across Jace's face was like the sunrise. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with pure joy. Their wedding, held in the small church in Kingman that November, was a simple but joyous affair. The entire town turned out to celebrate, along with ranchers from miles around. Sheriff Morgan gave the bride away, and Mrs. Tanner wept happily throughout the ceremony. As Rebecca and Jace exchanged vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified woman fleeing an abusive marriage to a confident bride choosing a life with a man who valued her as an equal, it seemed almost impossible that so much could change in less than a year. Yet as Jace slipped a wedding band alongside her engagement ring, his gray eyes filled with love and promise, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Jace's kiss was tender and reverent, a testament to everything they had overcome to reach this day. As cheers erupted around them, Rebecca held tight to her new husband, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought Frank Sullivan to her door on that autumn morning, and the brave cowboy who had ensured he left on a one-way train. 5 years later, Rebecca stood on the porch of the Xavier ranch house, watching as Jace taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, clung to Rebecca's skirts, her dark curls so like her father's blowing in the gentle breeze. "Mama, look," Thomas called, his face alight with pride as he guided the patient pony in a small circle. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Rebecca called back, smiling at the picture they made her tall, handsome husband walking alongside their son, one hand hovering protectively near the child while encouraging his independence. Mrs. Tanner emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her ever-present apron. "My, how that boy grows," she remarked fondly. "The spitting image of his father, isn't he? In every way," Rebecca agreed, lifting Elizabeth into her arms as the little girl reached up. "Though Elizabeth here has his temperament stubborn as the day is long," Mrs. Tanner chuckled. "A family trait, to be sure." She patted Rebecca's shoulder affectionately. "Never thought I'd see this house filled with children's laughter again. Does my old heart good." Rebecca smiled, remembering how different her life had been before Kingman, before Jace. Sometimes it seemed like a distant nightmare, the fear, the pain, the desperation of her first marriage. Other times, usually when she witnessed some small kindness from Jace toward their children, the contrast between the two men who had been her husbands struck her anew. "Letter came for you, Mrs. Tanner said, interrupting her thoughts. She handed Rebecca an envelope. "From Denver, it looks like." Rebecca shifted Elizabeth to her hip as she opened the letter. As she read, a complex mix of emotions washed over her. "Everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Tanner asked, noting her expression. "Yes," Rebecca said slowly. "It's from a lawyer in Denver. Frank Sullivan died last month. Pneumonia, apparently." Despite everything Frank had done, Rebecca felt a momentary sadness, not for the man he had been, but for the man he might have been had he made different choices. "He never did manage to save his father's ranch," she continued, skimming the letter. "It was sold to pay debts years ago. He died with nothing to his name." Mrs. Tanner made a small clucking sound. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it after what he put you through, but it's a sad end nonetheless." Rebecca nodded, folding the letter and tucking it into her pocket as Jace approached, carrying a triumphant Thomas on his shoulders. "Did you see me, Mama? I rode all by myself," Thomas exclaimed. "You were magnificent," Rebecca assured him, leaning in to accept Jace's kiss on her cheek. "A true Xavier cowboy." Jace's eyes met hers, noticing something in her expression. "Everything all right?" Rebecca nodded. "I'll tell you later," she said quietly, then smiled at their son. "Now, who's ready for Mrs. Tanner's apple pie? I believe it's cooling on the windowsill as we speak." As the children cheered and Mrs. Tanner herded them inside with promises of dessert, Jace held Rebecca back, his hand gentle on her arm. "What is it?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. Rebecca handed him the letter, watching as he read it quickly. "Sullivan's dead," he said finally, looking up at her. "How do you feel about that?" It was so like Jace to ask about her feelings rather than offering his own opinion. In 5 years of marriage, he had never once told her how she should think or feel, never dismissed her thoughts as unimportant. "Relieved in a way," she admitted. "Though that seems unkind," Jace shook his head. "It's human. He caused you great pain, threatened your safety. It's natural to feel relief knowing he can never hurt you again." Rebecca leaned into his embrace, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I also feel sad. Not for the man he was to me, but for the waste of a life. He had opportunities, advantages, a future, and he squandered them all." Jace pressed a kiss to her temple. "That was his choice, Rebecca. Just as you chose to build something better from the ashes he left behind." She looked up at him. This man who had shown her what love truly meant, not possession or control, but partnership and respect. "I did build something better," she agreed, her heart full as she gazed toward the house where their children's laughter could be heard. "Something more wonderful than I ever dared to hope for." Jace smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. "As did I, my love, as did I." Hand in hand, they walked back to the house that had become their haven, their home, their future, the place where Rebecca Cooper Xavier had finally found the peace and love she deserved, with the cowboy who had made it all possible.